everyone. Welcome to Winning the Challenger Sale. This month's episode, Email Pitfalls to Avoid. I'm here joined by my fantastic co-host, Jen Allen. Jen, how you doing?
I'm great. Welcome, everybody.
Welcome indeed. So, couple things to kick us off. Number one, we've opened an interesting poll. We'd love for you to answer that question as honestly as you possibly can. We're going to come back and discuss in a second. But first, we're going to have a little fun sort of digging at the heart of the topic today with a quick video. Some of you may have seen it. The lizard does its good.
A near miraculous escape.
Okay, so first off, apologies to anyone with crippling ophidiophobia, it's pronounced, fear of snakes. But if you've seen that video, it's I think it's a pretty famous one. But the point we're making here is in the context of email, and particularly in B2B sales, when we're trying to interact with a prospect, the frame of reference, the frame of mind we want everybody in is sort of that, right? Like, let's take our customer's perspective here and consider when they wake up every morning and they get online and they look at their inbox, there are a number of cold emails essentially waiting for them, tracking them down, trying to catch them, trying to grab 15, 30 minutes, 60 minutes of their time for whatever reason, right? We've got to keep that in mind as we go through this conversation today. And so the question that we posed in our initial poll was a very simple one. Is email dead? So let's take a look at our poll results. Emma, can you pull it up here?
It's up. So we had 94% of respondents say no to is email dead.
Okay. Jen, what do you think? Is email dead?
If anybody catches me ever saying like cold calling is dead, emails are dead, whatever is dead, you better call me out. No, I don't think email's dead. I think bad emails died a long time ago.
Yes, I would agree with you 100% there. I think the other thing to keep in mind here is email, in terms of its utility, has evolved and changed. And that's really what we're here to talk about today. The title of this session today is Email Pitfalls to Avoid. But we're not only going to talk about the pitfalls, of course, we're going to share a lot about tactics, best practices, ways to avoid those pitfalls or overcome them. But the really interesting conversation to start this out is what's going on lately in the context of how our customers and prospects ultimately consume email. And Jen, this is something I want to turn to you, because I know that you've become good friends with Will over at Lavender. And if you guys aren't familiar with Lavender, we can talk a little bit about who they are. But Lavender introduced us to this concept called the mental spam filter. Jen, what's the mental spam filter all about in the context of how our prospects consume information that we're sending via email?
Yeah. So I don't think it's news to anybody that, our prospects are really busy and there's a lot of noise, and COVID just made it so that everybody was using email as a channel in many regards. And so the way that we respond when we're overwhelmed is we start to categorize things, right? If you think about your own personal lives, we do this all the time. But when a buyer has 1,000 emails coming into their inbox, what they're doing is they're quickly looking through and saying, what can I reply to? What do I want to reply to? What can I forward to somebody else to take care of? Or what just goes in the delete? And so there are cues and things that buyers have gotten smart about that they can look at very quickly and say, yep, it's a cold email, asking for time, throw it in the garbage. So I love this concept. Again, Will Allred from Lavender was the one who introduced us to it.
Oh, and by the way, the average read time for an email today is just over 13 seconds. There, with various recent studies have pinned it around 11, 12, 13 seconds. That seems to be consensus. But that further bolsters the point around this mental spam filter. And the thing we want to start thinking about and recognizing from our customer's perspective, from our prospect's perspective, this is what they're subconsciously or unwittingly doing, right? They're going through this really quick burn categorization activity to figure out what you're sending and whether they should act on it or not. And they only take about 13.4 seconds to actually figure that out. So short attention span, little mind share, little time to make an impact. We've talked a lot about that concept on this webinar series, but we'll talk even more about it today. Second question I want to ask here, though, is what's our general approach to email? And so we do have another quick poll. Are we going for quality or are we going for quantity? Now, I'd probably argue that in this day and age, when we've got 13.4 seconds to try to make an impact, we should try to go for quality, but I understand that it's a balancing act. We're all very busy and we're trying to do things at scale. So curious to hear for folks on the line here, how much time do you spend preparing to send a cold email? And if you've answered the poll, feel free to chat, share perspectives. We'll close it out in about 10, 15 seconds here. Let's let some responses come in. All right, Emma, what do we got? Look at that. Okay, so about half the group here is saying between 5 and 15 minutes writing a given cold email, 10% less than 5 minutes, 14% more than 30 minutes, and then a good third of the group in the 15 to 30 minute category. Jen, how much time do you spend writing a cold email?
I can tell you how much time I used to spend, which was probably even more than most of the people on this call, which was like 45 minutes, an hour. And I'd pat myself on the back and be like, what a great email. And no one would ever read it. Now I'm looking at maybe 5-10 minutes because I've got an approach for scale and a framework I'm working off of instead of looking at every email as an independent uphill climb.
That framework sounds interesting. I wonder if we'll get into that a little bit.
Oh, I wonder.
So Jen's point is exactly right. Like, and I saw a couple of the comments here, which is great. Like ever since I started listening to the podcast, I spend more time on it. That's great to hear. So some of these tactics we've been sharing are sticking. I think it comes down to this when we're talking about quality versus quantity, when we're talking about trying to find that right balance, we want to make sure we're not too far on either the left side of the spectrum or the right side of the spectrum here, right? Like too much time spent on writing emails, you're probably thinking like, look, I need to land the perfect customized insight to make a strong impression here. I've only got one shot at this. I'm going to sit here and I'm going to make sure this happens. Personalization is key. I'm going to spend 30 minutes on each one of these, make sure they're hyper personalized and that I feel an immediate connection, or I should say my prospect feels an immediate connection once this reaches their inbox. That's one side of the spectrum. The other side of the spectrum might be like the mindset around, look, I don't have time to tailor every single email. I just got to get them out. These are emails, not proposals. I'm going to move quickly. I need to move at scale. It's a numbers game. If I send 20 a day, I know I'm going to get the meeting volume I need. That's another way to look at it. What we would argue, what we would propose here is we got to find that Goldilocks amount, right? Like we've got to find the right amount of time in terms of preparation, writing, tailoring before we hit send. So what we're going to actually share today is a little bit more about, Jen alluded to it, this formulaic approach to drafting emails that are, I think, one, really important, concise. Remember, 13.4 seconds. Nobody wants to read, the executive summary of the Challenger sale in one email. We've got to boil that down to its essence. It's got to be relevant, and I use the word relevant very intentionally here versus personalized, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. And then finally, it's got to be thought-provoking. Of course, it's got to spur some action, at the very least, interest in having a conversation, learning more about the topic at hand. Plus, it should also reflect the potential of the opportunity or the size of your territory. So we are very conscious here on this call that we've got some folks who have thousands of potential opportunities to reach out to in their territory or in their pool. We've got some folks who might have 5, right? And so clearly, it's all relative. You're going to spend more time in preparation when you have a finite number of opportunities to go after. We don't want to turn and burn. However, if you need to move quickly and move at scale because you're trying to cover a lot of ground, you're going to want to find a way to move quickly, move at scale, but not sacrifice quality. And so that's really the point of our lesson today here. You may recall, this isn't the first time we've talked about email and challenger emails in particular. One of the most frequently asked questions over the course of the last several years has been, love Challenger, understand what it means in sort of the context of a live conversation, but like, how do I do Challenger in email or in a cold outreach? And so we actually answered that question on the very second episode of our first season, Winning the Challenger Sale, where we kind of juxtaposed like what we see commonly, which is on the left side here, that little thumbnail. We call these either the name drop approach or the show up and throw up approach. Again, very common, who we are, what we do, all the companies we work with in your industry, features and functions of our new platform, updates we've got. We want to share more. Let's get a call in the books and do a demo. And we propose that, look, those things aren't landing in today's environment. What we need to focus on is more on the right-hand side. So we shared this initial template here where we think about strategically writing subject lines that spark interest and curiosity, building credibility in the first paragraph, introducing a reframe or piquing curiosity to learn more in the second, and then finally landing with a powerful request. What do you want them to do differently now? We're going to evolve that a step further today. We're actually going to take this a step further and take one of those elements of the formulaic approach to heart, which is really sort of being concise and ensuring that we've got some brevity here. We're not sacrificing quality, and we're not sacrificing the fact that what we're trying to do is pique curiosity. What we are going to focus here on is putting something out there that can pass that mental spam filter, that can pass that 13.4 seconds of mind share that we're going to get from our prospects today. Jen, any thoughts before we kind of dig into email pitfalls to avoid and start sharing some super tactical and hopefully actionable advice for the group?
No, let's get into it.
Let's do it. So again, in the context of the new way to look at Challenger emails, if you haven't seen that season 1, episode 2, go check it out. That's sort of the 101. Let's start talking about the 201. Let's start talking about, hey, 2 years later, throughout the course of the pandemic, everybody's been working virtually. We've learned a thing or two about how people behave, how people consume, and ultimately what is going to give us the best shot at getting a response when we're sending cold email. So 3 big pitfalls to avoid. We're going to tackle these one at a time. A couple are quicker than others. We'll spend a lot of time in this first one because I think, Jen, at least, I know for you and for me too, I think there is quite a significant difference between personalization and relevance, if that's your aim when you're tailoring messages and tailoring emails. But it's a serious trap that I think almost everyone has fallen into before, and most people probably still continue to fall into it. So we'll talk about the difference between personalization and relevance. The second thing we'll talk about is simply telling someone they have a problem in your email, or we're all trying to do Challenger here, right? We all need to be insight led. We all need to have that aim of exposing or introducing a business problem that might exist in a prospect's business that they either are overlooking or underappreciating or are unaware of altogether. It's much more effective to do that diplomatically. And we would propose that the diplomatic way of doing that is not telling them they have this problem or being presumptive about it, but asking strategic, thought-provoking questions to try to pique curiosity in their own learning journey to explore whether they have a problem that exists. You can be the one to facilitate that, but you shouldn't be the one barging in basically saying, hey, you've got this problem and I'm gonna find a way to help you solve it, right? Finally, asking for time versus gauging interest to learn. We're going to propose a shift in thinking here around the CTA of a cold email, the call to action. And we're going to introduce a new term today that we refer to as a CTL, a call to learn. So let's dig in. Number 1, mistaking personalization with relevance. Jen, what does forced personalization sound like? Let's talk a little bit about this. What do you see most often when you sense forced personalization in an email?
Yeah. So I think I'm not here to knock personalization that is relevant. If there is a serious connection that you find and you have something in common, great, use it. But what I see a lot of times is it appears as though an AE or an SDR was told, personalize your emails. So they write something super basic that has nothing to do with the body of the rest of the email. And you could see a couple examples on the screen. I see you're based in Chicago. Cool. Now, why we're the best and leading provider of X, and it comes across as inauthentic, right? And it's not necessary to land your point. So I think the idea with forced personalization is if you can feel this, right? If we're trying hard to do something in the sake of personalization, it's probably a good catch for us to stop.
Love it. Yeah, and I think, look, this is one of those classic, like, hey, I used to do this, then I got burned, now I do this instead. I think the point of this is, as long as you can remember the idea that, look, personalization is good, it's fine, but forced personalization that comes off as disingenuous, that's really the killer, right? Like that's what makes it feel and look and sound like spam when we send it. Let's compare that, juxtapose that with relevance, right? So, hey, saw your comment on Joe's post this morning regarding ABC initiative. It got me thinking, right? Or your CEO spoke about the need to improve. Or, hey, I met with your colleague last week and she offered some insight into what's making X initiative difficult right now. Jen, what's the sort of the key point to make around relevance in an email? How do we get it? How do we ensure we use it consistently?
Yeah. So I think the idea with relevance is to show that we've put our time and effort into observing something about the company that would cause us to believe that they would be a good fit, right? So when we do this effectively, it's like the first line here, like saw your comment on Joe's post this morning. It got me thinking. It got me thinking needs to align with the body of the message. Where we can fall down in the trap is thinking, if we just say, I saw your comment on Joe's post this morning. Now we're the leading provider. Like it's the same problem with personalization. So the idea is, what is your hook? What is your belief that your observation that caused you to believe that there's something of value that you have to say with the body of and within the body of the message? And I will say this is probably the single biggest thing that I've changed in my email outreach that has dramatically improved the quality of the content. And it's also forcing me to think through, why would this be relevant, instead of just tossing it over the fence and saying, hey, customer, you figure out if it's relevant or not. Because as you talked about, if you've got 10, 12, 13 seconds, it's just a heavy lift for a customer. It shouldn't be on them to figure out if it's relevant or not.
Totally. And look, there's also a great comment in here from Alexandra. She mentions, I can see that last one, maybe go back to the forced personalization. I can see the last one, funding round C, relevant to the solution or relevant to the company if the solution is relevant to them. I would say yes. Here, let me go back, right? So congrats on funding round C. What an exciting time it must be at company. I'd say absolutely, right? Like finding financial information that creates something for you to talk about and try to make it relevant, for sure. But the thing I'd push your thinking on there a little bit is, don't you think everybody else that's reaching out to them is also congratulating them on funding round C? So the point being, don't look for that surface level cursory information that you can use to try to personalize your outreach and make it relevant to them, again, at the surface. Start thinking about, okay, this company just closed funding round C. Does that create a host of problems or challenges in any way for them? Like, obviously it's good news, it's exciting times, but now what are they doing? Where are they investing that, right? Are they hiring more people? Are they investing in R&D? Like, those types of things open up new opportunities for potential problems to pop up. And that's where we really want to go. I saw funding round C, congrats. I'd imagine you might be thinking about XYZ now, right? That's the difference truly between personalization and relevance in my mind. Cool. So here's what we're going to do. Let's spend a few minutes looking at a couple of examples. And I'll bring up our template here just to show you quickly the components of what we believe are emails written for relevance and not forced personalization. So there's 4 main parts here. Number 1, subject line. We've done some research. Others have done some research. The point being, 6 words or less, try to spark curiosity. Try to find a way to get them to simply read on and imply that you're going to be speaking about a topic that is of interest or should be of interest to them. The credibility piece is critically important. And this is where I think we've evolved and advanced our perspective here to ensure that we're not coming in presuming they have a problem, but just start to talk about something that we learned in our research, which leads to a thought-provoking question, right? So we've got a unique perspective to share, and we're going to start introducing that perspective by putting it in the context of an observation we've made in our preparation and in our research. We go down a step there. So as long as we've shown we're credible by showing them that we've done the heavy lifting, we've done our homework, and we're not just spraying and praying emails across our entire territory, then we start to tease the reframe a little bit. And we would recommend today doing that with a question, right? Start to question your prospect a little bit, or plant the seed of potentially an underappreciated or overlooked cost or risk, and ultimately how that may impact their ability to achieve their goal or objective. Again, so the credibility can be all about what you see out there in your research and preparation on goals or objectives that are stated in publicly available information, perhaps CEO comments in a recent analyst call or earnings report, right? Now the question comes in, interesting, I read those comments. Have you thought about this, right? Or I'd imagine you're thinking about this. I'm curious to learn more about how you're dealing with this, right? Finally, a powerful request. We talk about powerful requests all the time. I think it's a staple of any good B2B sales process today to make sure you've got a tangible, verifiable action at the end of every touch point, call, activity. But in the context of that cold outreach, as I mentioned before, we're not just asking for time. What we are proposing today is we should start to ask more about whether or not they're curious to just learn more. Are you curious to have a conversation with us and dig into this a little bit further? And we'll talk about in a second why that's really important. It's all about getting a prospect in the right mindset to start a learning journey and hopefully a purchase journey with you, as opposed to just asking for 15 minutes on the calendar, which is what everybody else is doing. Jen, any thoughts on our frame here before we dig into a couple of examples?
No, I think the last point I think is so important for us all to remember. And I'm so guilty of making this mistake before, which is prospects didn't ask us to send us this email, right? And sometimes a bullet hits a bullet and we can send the wrong email and get the right outcome. But I think with this one in particular, most people are not going to say yes to a sales call when they're not in a buying motion. And if we consider that and we appreciate that people often want to learn before they're sold to, I think that just changes the entire tone of our emails. It certainly did for me.
Exactly. Now, Jen, I'm going to ask you to share a little bit more about a couple of these examples. This is that template we just talked about with some anonymized yet real life examples that we've collected. The first one here is think about that spectrum of, quality versus quantity, or the size of your territory or pool, the number of opportunities you have to go after. This one, you might read this and see something that is highly relevant because there seems to be a lot of research and prep that's gone into it. This is the framework, or at least sort of the prototype of what I would consider an email that is meant for a tier 1 customer, where we probably are spending upwards of 30 minutes plus putting it out there. Jen, can you kind of walk us through the core elements of your tier 1 customer email?
Yeah. And by the way, if you're looking at this email and saying it's long, that's okay, right? I'm not going to please everybody on this call, nor is that my goal. And we're going to share 2 different examples. This would be someone that I've identified that would be, like, as Mike said, a great tier 1 opportunity. I'm going to put the work in. In my mind, every sentence of an email is earning the right to read the next sentence. And what you'll see, this is a mistake I made all the time. I would spend the first sentence introducing us, introducing our company, when the prospect has no reason to care, right? And it's a great way to put that mental spam filter on delete. And so my intention with an email like this is the subject line is referencing their CEO's name, right? If I got an email from our CEO saying Andy Harris's comments, I'd open it up because I would be scared she was talking about me. And that's why I was getting the email, right? And I'm not trying to put fear in, but I am trying, to Mike's point on the previous page, instill curiosity. What is it that Andy said, right? So that's the intention of the subject. Then when we get in, I'm driving right to, this is the thing I observed that your company is trying to achieve, right? This particular company was trying to sell, higher margin and increase cross-sell after they acquired a company. In this example, I actually had a second executive comment, different senior executive, where they said, we also want to do this. It's not necessary. 1 is enough, right? But this, I had 2. What Mike talked about in terms of the reframe and the curiosity, instead of telling someone, what most companies miss when they do this, which is how I used to write all my emails, what I realized is we don't like, as humans, to be talked at, right? Like, we like 2-way conversations. I would never walk up to someone at a party and just start talking at them about me and what I think they're doing wrong. But I was making that mistake all the time in email writings. And so this is where the word curious, you're going to see this word like 55 times in this presentation, because that's what we want to convey in our tone, right? Like, I'm curious. Have you ever explored how X impacts Y? And then you're tying it back specifically to the thing that they said they were trying to achieve. And then what I love, and someone called this out in the comments, I think it was Ethan, I'm absolutely inspired by Josh Braun's writing style, right? Because what this does is, it doesn't, in my opinion, I wrote it, so I'm biased, but like, it doesn't reek of commission breath. It's not desperate to try to get you to sales call. What it is saying is, we've got some evidence to show that this problem is often solved in the wrong way. And I don't know for sure how you feel, because I don't know you, you don't know me. But I am curious if you'd be interested to just learn more about what we've learned. And then importantly, compare that against your observations, right? I want to set the tone. This is a two-way conversation. This is not me educating you. This is us having a smart conversation grounded in a perspective that's meaningful. And then in the very last sentence, it's intentional, right? Like either way, I'll be fine if you don't respond, but I want to say like, good job on something, whether they had a good close or whatever the case may be. And so my intention with this is not to show up sounding like a sales rep, but to show up with someone like that sounds like someone who is just curious about this. And have you ever explored this? And in my opinion, like if you looked at emails I was sending 5 years ago, I was telling customers they had it wrong. I have no business doing that. I can have a perspective, I can have a hypothesis, but the tone here is really, I think, one of my biggest lessons learned.
Jen, I want to just double click on the point around the difference between a call to action, like get the meeting on the books, and the call to learn. Jen and I were joking around about this yesterday when we were preparing for this. We were sort of aging ourselves and we were thinking like, hey, that's the thing that's ingrained in everybody's minds, and it has been for a long time. Just ask for the business. Or in this case, if you're an SDR, or if you're reaching, just ask for the time. Like you just got to ask for the time. And that might have worked in a world where we weren't multi-threading, right? Where we didn't have various different channels of communications, where email really was the only way we might be able to get in touch with someone if we could find it, because you would expect a response at a higher clip, even if it was no. Now we've got all kinds of different channels through which we can communicate with our prospects. So perhaps we shouldn't be thinking of this as the only way to try to secure that meeting. Perhaps it's just one input on this at the start of a new learning journey. And that's really what we need to sort of reframe our minds around. It's not a call to action anymore. It's a call to learn. And that action will come if we make a compelling case that there's something for an intellectually curious person to pick up from a conversation with us. So I want to move on. We've got a few more minutes here. Of course, we extend as long as you guys want to with additional questions, comments, but there are a couple more quick hits. We did promise we've got one example here, and you can see the difference. Tier 1 customer, where we only have a few opportunities, we want to put in a lot of time, versus, hey, we got to cover a lot of ground, we got to do this at scale. You'll notice a little bit of difference. This is a little more templatized. This is a real one, but instead of those 3 commercial objectives that we identified in our research, now we've got one primary potential business problem that we're seeing with other companies that we're trying to pique curiosity around and build some credibility around. We include, of course, that thought-provoking question here, and then, of course, the call to learn, right? You'll receive these slides, you'll see the replay, but if you want to dig into this deeper, but this is a good example of how we can have sort of highly credible emails and relevant emails, I should say, at scale when we don't have 30 minutes plus to spend on each one. So a couple more quick hits here. And these are really quick because they're pretty straightforward. Instead of telling someone they have a problem versus asking thought-provoking questions, let's take a look at some examples. Sorry, my screen is slow. Take a look on the left-hand side, right? We've got, there's a big difference between these presumptive statements that we've been talking about. You may have a problem, you're probably struggling with. What CXOs often miss is, versus that thought-provoking question, right? You're just flipping it and you're starting with, as Jen was talking about, curious, has the organization ever explored how this business problem or barrier actually impacts your ability to accomplish task or goal, right? Similar below, curious, how often does your team encounter this business problem or barrier? And then finally, curious, have you figured out how to eliminate business problem or barrier? Again, this is all about just juxtaposing the difference here. And this is something you can tactically try out today. Try to replace statements with thought-provoking questions as you seek to pique curiosity and get somebody in the right mindset to want to learn a little bit more. And then last but not least, asking for time versus gauging interest to learn. We've alluded to this throughout here, but from CTA to CTL, again, what's your objective? Are you just trying to get the call scheduled? Or are you trying to gauge the prospect's interest in actually learning more? And there's a very clear difference, right? So just a quick illustrative example on the left-hand side. Hey, can we schedule that 10 to 15 minute call this week? I want to share a little bit more about the platform and answer any questions you may have. How many requests do senior executives get for the quick 10 to 15 minutes, right? Their calendar would be full of 10 to 15 minute check-ins all day long if they took those. Instead, try something like what you see on the right, gauging the prospect's interest in learning more. Hey, if you're interested in learning more, I just included here this clip of this webinar replay, a white paper infographic. Take a look. I would be super curious to get your take on how these findings here compare to your own observations. Jen, anything to add to these last two real quick?
Yeah, I would just say this question has come up a couple times in the chat. Just because we don't ask for time doesn't mean they won't respond back and say, I want to talk, right? I think part of this is the belief system that prospects are smart enough to know what we want, right? They know that we want to talk to them. But I think when we ask for time, even if it's time to learn, it's still an ask of their time. And again, some people are not in a buying motion. And so we have to be respectful of that. So what my experience has been is I send this email, I don't ask for time, but oftentimes the response I get is, hey, admin, can you set up 30 minutes with Jen? So just because we don't say it doesn't mean they won't take us up, but it also sometimes the response is, no, I want to see the analysis before I talk to you. And that's okay, right? We're just supporting the buyer's learning journey.
Yeah. All right. Now, as we try to do most episodes, we want to leave you guys with a few takeaways, a couple resources, tools. I like to call them pin-up sheets, right? You print this deck out if you have a printer, you pin it up next to your computer, whether you're in the office or at home, and use them in your day-to-day. The first one is, okay, well, how does this all work in the context of like what I'm trying to accomplish as a challenger seller? Preparation, and then of course, teach, tailor, and taking control. I think there's some helpful do's and don'ts here when it comes to emails, and I'll just show them quickly, but let you guys take these home with you and unpack them. But like, if you look at teaching, for example, it's what we've talked about, right? Don't barge in and tell someone that they're wrong. Tease insights by asking those thought-provoking questions. Or tailoring. Don't assume personalization equals relevance. Look for relevant facts to align to the reason why you're reaching out, so on and so forth. But this is a good way to remember those three T's plus constructive tension that you know and live well in the challenger philosophy and mindset. Here are the things that you can use to remember how to accomplish them in email outreach as well. And then the last piece I'll share with you guys is just try to look out for these potential mini pitfalls, right? And a lot of them are either like cliche phrases or unnecessary filler words or buzzwords or, marketing-y subject lines, right? Like, hope this finds you well, checking in, touching base. Hey, I was researching your company, or I'm writing because synergy, brainstorming. We all have our own corporate buzzwords that we probably lean on more often than we should in emails. Just be on the lookout for those. Again, hopefully a helpful cheat sheet for you. And last but not least, as we always close out with our key takeaways, our stop, start, continue framework. If we had to boil this episode down to its essence, it's stop forcing personalization, stop telling people they have a problem, start tailoring your emails for relevance, start asking questions to pique curiosity, and continue. There's a little callback to previous episodes on prioritization and account planning, for example, using this idea of reframe potential to prioritize your efforts. Does this particular company, this opportunity, this account, is there something they're missing that gives me a foothold to teach? Is there some reason why an intellectually curious executive would want to learn from me in a conversation? We can prioritize our time by looking across our territory and looking for places where there is high reframe potential, not exclusively on firmographics and demographics. High reframe potential may reveal a new set of tier one opportunities for you to go after. Use that as you think about allocating your time wisely when you're writing emails. Spend a little more time on those that have high reframe potential. Spend a little less on those that don't.